Welcome back to Why Blank Lost. I'm David Bloomberg, and contrary to the fake news you might have heard, the era of alliances is not over.
Oh,
Mm. With me, as always, is my own ally, Jessica Lewis.
yes, I am definitely your ally. I wish we could play this game together. We would probably get voted out really quickly.
Probably.
But listen, before we get into all that,
Yeah.
what the hell is going on in your basement right now? It's a little, I don't know, party-esque. What is happening?
Full tilt boogie. Or maybe it's club condo, since nobody has any idea what that actually means. And we think it's just something Jeff Probst made up on the spot.
Oh, but you told me to do some research on Full Tilt Boogie, and I
Did I?
did.
Okay.
Yes. You called me out on it when I was on Twitter saying, I don't know what that is either.
Oh,
And there's actually a definition for Full Tilt Boogie.
it's
And
what
it is
what I'm doing now.
no, it's really not that.
Oh.
It's most extreme level full capacity.
Ah.
So, see, most extreme level out full. See, I can't even read my own handwriting. I think this is out, but most extreme level. It's at full capacity. That's what it is. Thank you very much. So that is what that means. So just so you know.
Yeah. And I joined the well, I hate to say the club, but the group doing research to find out what club condo is. Nobody knows what it means. There's literally, like, on TikTok, Full Tilt Boogie has like 1.2 million. I don't know if it's views or videos that had that hashtag in it. Club condo has 0. It's not even in Urban Dictionary. It's nowhere. Jeff made it up. I mean, I don't know what goes on in that man's mind, but yeah.
He's really trying to connect with
To
the younger
who?
generations.
But then even the younger generation doesn't know what that means.
I don't know. Well, I mean, at least Full Tilt Boogie means something. So he was halfway there.
Yeah.
But
So
anyway, your party is over.
yeah, when the party's over. And actually, it was supposed to be a bigger party. We had another guest scheduled this week, but since you and I formed a majority, I decided we didn't even need them as a number and sent them away.
If you don't need him, I'm sure you told him just that too.
Yeah, that's what I said. We don't even need you as a number.
Great strategy, Danny.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Actually, I have to admit, I'm lying. It was always just going to be the two of us. But if there's one thing we learned from this episode of Survivor, it's that lying is okay. But under no circumstances should you tell the truth, because that will just get you in trouble and nobody will believe you.
So many lessons from this week's Survivor.
Yes. Now, of course, the question did come up, whether we should play, Full Tilt Boogie as a player. Actually, it was sort of a debate, but it wasn't so much of a debate, but rather Jeff insisting it was the only way to play, and Danny going along with it, and only Jam being the voice of reason. Danny said, you want to win the game, of course, but you want to be great in doing it, which he seems to equate to making big moves
and winning things
instead of
the
winning.
Game.
Yeah,
right.
Now, of course, what we are most concerned about is winning the game, and not Full Tilt Boogie. And that's why we're here to discuss why Frannie lost. To do that, we will compare her game to my rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season 1, before that term Full Tilt Boogie was even a thing. Closer to when boogie was used a lot more often. And I've been updating those ever since, unlike Jeff and his linguistics.
You're just ripping on Jeff today. Into it.
As opposed to most podcasts, we would never do that.
Usually it's more about his game choices as opposed to his linguistical choices.
Yes, that's true. Anyway, we of course use all the non-spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, and secret scenes. The newest version of the rules can be found on our website by going to our dedicated page at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed and clicking on the link bubble for the Survivor 44 rules.
And also,
yeah, hold on. I'm not. What were you? I don't know what you were doing.
I was pointing at my poster because there is another version of those rules that's a lot shorter.
A little insider information here. I have Jessica's left arm covered up with my notes, so when she does something with her left arm, I can't actually see it. So she could just be sitting
I'm just gonna do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I don't. They have to blur out my finger if I did that. I don't know. I won't do that because that would be very rude. But I should. Oh, you just gave me such a good idea. I'm gonna have to start.
That's it. I'll just move things over now and there. Okay, now I'm gonna fix that.
Listen, it's not for this episode. We'll do it another time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, before we get to the rules, we always have some other things to discuss from this week's episode. And of course, the first thing we have to talk about is that amazing immunity challenge. And I'm not talking about Carson putting together another puzzle that he'd practiced previously, but rather the part of the immunity challenge, the work that was necessary to get to the puzzle, because we know that you're very familiar with that.
I am. And can I just say, I think they took it a little more easy on this crew of people who had to.
Isn't that what all Survivor players say? It's
okay, but if you
I had to go uphill both ways.
I think I had to go up 2 hills.
Jessica working.
You can do it, Jessica.
Ken is purple and orange.
You almost there, Jess?
Jessica struggling.
I can't get...
Almost there.
Face last mound.
Oh my God, my whole tit is hanging out, and you're putting this on our podcast. Look at this. This is my God, that was seriously one of the worst moments of my life.
And that was a supercut.
Listen, I'm glad you minimized it because that was awful.
I didn't minimized it on the screen now.
How long it was, for how long it actually took me to do that.
I only gave the scenes of you. Nobody wanted to see anyone else.
I didn't realize how much sand was falling out of my top. Listen, this is what you need to understand, okay?
Let me just say, I'm sorry I was going to give an intro to that video and warn the listeners that a video was coming because they're probably confused now, and I'm a little late in saying it, but that was a video. So
of me dying in the sand. Yes. So a couple of things here. All right. I'm gonna kvetch for just a second about that whole structure of things. So I noticed that I had like 2 hills that I had to go up, which was awful and terrible. And I was really, really bad at that challenge. And I will say I did really well in most of the challenges, but that one in particular, my hands were tied so tight, and everyone's hands, were tied really tight around their waists. And like at one point I saw Carolyn was like, we weren't allowed to do that. You had to stay on the front of you. And you also couldn't, I couldn't move my elbows the way that some people are moving their elbows. But regardless, I had so much sand up my nose during that challenge. I was literally drowning in sand. It was in my nose. It was in my mouth. And I was like, as I was doing that, I was thinking, I'm dying on national television. Like, this is happening right now. I will be dying on national TV. Yeah.
There was
my God. I'm sorry. There's a spider that literally
I'm like, what? I didn't even put the video up again.
Okay, no, that was just me freaking out. Okay, we're good. This is my life.
Jungle. You come on.
I hate spiders with every ounce of my being. It was literally right here in front. Anyway, so moving on. But yes, so that was me almost dying because of a spider. No, I almost died in the sand. Now I have a spider that's attacking me. This is my life. It was terrible. But I will also add that prior to that challenge, I had one of the most hilarious, greatest conversations with Jeff Probst ever. So, that was quite fun because he was standing next to where I was before the challenge started, and I was commenting on what he was making us do, and it was really quite amusing because we were bound, wrists, feet on our knees, you know. So it was an interesting conversation.
I can't imagine why they didn't air it.
I know, right? It was a little inappropriate, but funny, very funny. So thanks for that reminder.
Sure. Would you like me to make it into a TikTok video?
Oh my God, no.
I thought,
No.
what was that? Oh my God, yes. Is that what you
No,
said?
I believe I said no.
I keep hearing yes. I don't know.
I can't believe you actually pulled that clip. That is so. I've never actually gone back and watched my season, so to see that right now is like flashbacks. Like I
can
didn't
play it
realize
again.
how I was blurred out so many
Oh
places.
yeah,
I
you
had
were.
no idea.
Yeah. You were.
I
You were
didn't
blurred.
realize until the very end that literally my whole boob was hanging out, and I was like, "Thank God it was covered in sand," because I had no idea my top was completely down at that point. The things you learn about yourself while watching national TV, you're like,
Yes.
"Oh, okay, that's nice."
Yeah, that bathing suit top was not meant for that kind of activity.
It really was not, and I was so good about trying to choose the right structure, and I did not know I'd be having to wriggle around in sand like that. Oh, it was terrible. Anyway, so there you go.
We got to see the contestants this season do that, and they were a little bit, they had a little bit more success at it. Although Carolyn got stuck at the knot, yes. Jeff was over there talking about the puzzle, and Carolyn's like, "What about this knot?" So
yes, it was entertaining, but also like it should have just been longer for all of them.
Yeah.
But yes, that was something I experienced. So anyway, moving on from sand, drowning, and spiders, what do we have next?
Next, we have something that has nothing to do with you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's fine. That's fine. All right. We've exposed enough of Jessica at this point.
I alluded to it already earlier, but we have to talk about the whole situation with Jamie's fake idol. First, all season long, she has repeatedly been told the truth by other people and insisted to us that that person was lying.
Yes.
Then this week, she told the truth, and literally everybody was certain she was the one lying. So
it's amazing.
It all came full circle for her.
It really did. And she was so proud of herself for coming clean, and she felt so good.
Set me free.
Right. She was like, "Oh, this is so beautiful. Everyone has heard the truth, and now I've been," and she brought it up every place she could, even tribal council. She was like, by the way, and it was like, and everyone just kind of rolling their eyes. And I loved that they all looked over at Kane. Like, wait, are we going to get anything? And he was completely stone faced, which was so much fun. But at least that's what we saw.
I have to think, and there was a lot of discussion about this on Twitter, but of course, and Adam Klein has discussed at length here, how Jeff lectures the jury not to make anything. I think they had, first of all, obviously production knew there was a lot of discussion about this. So I think they probably told the jury, as a reminder.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
You cannot do it. None of you can talk about this, especially you, Kane.
Yeah.
None of you can make any faces at all. So I know that they were all concentrating on being like, just
because it's so hard to not. I mean, I was so angry when I finally saw what the legacy advantage was because I had given it to Ken, and then when I actually saw it, I was so angry because I was not expecting it to just be full on like immunity. Like, hey, here you go, 36 days, congratulations. But yeah, so, and it's hard to not react when you're sitting there. But yes, Jeff will definitely berate the jurors if they do anything. And in that moment, I have to say that's the correct thing to do because it's an idol, and you can't have the jury giving up to the people that are still playing the game that it's a fake idol.
Well, they didn't know it was a fake idol.
Right. Oh, and that's true.
But
also that she actually doesn't have it anymore. Right. That she doesn't have it anymore. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, yes, it makes complete sense that they would be like, you can't be involved in this at all.
Yeah. And we, of course, knew that her story was true. But if you step back and look at it like fully objectively, it's fairly preposterous. Like, really, you gave away your idol to someone because of an advantage that isn't even in the game. And then that person coincidentally happened to be voted out. And of course, they hadn't seen season 43. So I think Franny summed it up well in saying to Dalton Ross, that whole sequence is silly upon silly upon silly. The fact that the idol was fake just makes it all better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the whole thing was very entertaining to watch for sure.
Yeah. Now, I do want to give Jamie some idol related props because there's a secret scene with Danny finding the fake community idol that Brandon had hidden, which Kane found and then rehid in an earlier secret scene. And in this week's secret scene, we saw Danny talking to Jamie without revealing that he had found it about the various idols from each tribe. And she had like put together all the pieces from all the initial birdcage, like what was real and what was fake. And so, that was how he determined, oh, this is Ratu's fake idol, not a real idol.
Yeah.
But that was
they
very
switched
smart
them
on
up.
her part.
Oh, for sure. But they also switched them up. So the fact that she was able to keep it all structured is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, good on her for that one. Because let's face it, there aren't many moments that are shown with Jamie being right this season.
I know. Poor Jamie. And she was so happy. And she was so proud. We're all on our couches giggling. We're like, oh, this poor girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, moving on from idol stories, I want to mention the supposed chaos around camp that we saw, especially since it resulted in one of those rare occasions where the name mentioned immediately after the immunity challenge as the target was actually voted out. Like, if you can usually count on, they do the challenge and then they cut to someone and that someone says, John Smith is definitely going home. And you're like, John Smith is so safe. But in this case, it actually was Franny in both cases. But I think that's indicative of whatever chaos was happening was mostly in the minds or the apparent actions of those not really in on the true plan. I think Steven was right in saying on Know-It-Alls that Carson knew the plan was to target Franny the whole time, and he just lied his way through everything, setting up like, a whole fake vote split. And, when Heidi came to him and she was like, is there a leak? And he's like, what? No, I have no idea. And Jam Jam was right there with him. Indeed, in the preview, we hear Carolyn saying they lied to her all day. So this is something they're going to have to deal with next week. But the point is that while we will obviously soon discuss the decision to vote out Franny, it's pretty clear that it was not some last minute idea or whim. Much of this episode after the immunity challenge was full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Yes, and I do think that it certainly was probably led by those minimal amount of people that were kept out of the plan, for sure.
Yeah. Now as we move, we already had our Jeff Probst is wrong about linguistics segment, but now we have our usual Jeff Probst is wrong about blank segment. And we normally do this for stuff he says outside the show, but in this case, it's definitely worth talking about something that he said inside the show. And, I had already mentioned it and we even, started with it. But it was when Jeff said, full tilt boogie was the only way to play. And in the same episode, the person who played arguably the most full tilt boogie game was voted out, which should be something of a clue to him and to Danny, who voted for her, and others, that maybe, just maybe, Jeff is wrong.
I know. And I think Jeff really wants that survivor player to win again, like the Tonys, right? Where
Mhm.
where they really are playing that type of game, and it really is all out and at max capacity. But what we learned with Tony was that Tony did that, and then Tony failed by trying to do that a second time, right? And then learned the third time by putting the two things together so well. Like he found a kind of a balance for it. And so I really do think that Jeff in his mind has this idea that you can play at that speed and you can win, and it can happen. But more often than not, it doesn't, because this is what the result is. You
Right.
become the focal point, and everyone is seeing you and seeing the game that you're playing, because it's not under the radar. It is
Yeah.
full force in everyone's face, and then that person becomes a
It's
threat, and
Club
that person has to
Condo.
go. Whatever that is.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
yeah.
I'm sure Jeff will keep spouting versions of the same idea. You know, I'm not saying Full Tilt Boogie is the only reason Franny was voted out, because first, you know, it's not the case,
And we're
and
only 21
second,
minutes in.
and that's the second reason. Yes, but Jeff is either a little clueless or doesn't care about the proper way to play, because for years he's talked about big moves and everything
Yeah.
else, when good Survivor players know that is not how you win. But to Jeff, it is how you make a TV show.
Oh, and that's what I was just going to say, the same thing. For him, he's putting together a television show, and what the viewers react to are those big moments and those things that make you go, oh, I can't believe somebody just did that. And those shocking segments where somebody does something that's crazy, and and everyone sees it, some big mic drop moment that makes for great TV. Oh, that is not it's
not
not
that?
the same thing. But I will say that, Jeff is not the one trying to win the game. And sometimes we have seen how well it works for people to not play games in that fashion and then win. So I think it's just he's thinking, even though I think he wants a really great winner with every season, because then, that represents the
Right.
season. I do think that he also wants those big moves because it makes good TV for sure.
Yes. Yes.
Now,
Now,
I can't believe
speaking,
you have that.
what? Oh, that clip.
That clip.
I
It's
made it.
terrible.
I clipped it all together.
At this point, I should never think differently of your editing abilities when it comes to all of the TikTok work that you've been doing.
That's right. I
Mhm.
almost posted it as a TikTok ahead of time, but
Yeah, you didn't want to give me a heads up that this was
no,
happening.
exactly.
No
Exactly.
warning.
Now, you mentioned, putting together the TV show and everything, and Jeff's podcast this week was almost entirely focused on the visual and audio production, which was actually fairly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Then in his "This is why Jeff sucks" question, or section, there was finally someone with a comment about there being too many twists. Jeff did his usual song and dance. I guess I should put the boogie lights back on. Saying that, twists are there to keep players off balance, so an alliance of 4 can't just dominate, because, yeah, heaven forbid people be able to play the game. But but he also ignored how all the added twists tend to make people play more conservatively, as we and others have discussed before. Jeff claimed that a comment like this one, makes him think about it and makes him uncertain himself as to whether they may have put too many twists in the game. So a comment like this has the same effect on him as a twist does in the game, which just made my eyes roll. And he acknowledged they may not always get it right, but he hears people who says things like this.
Does he hear us? Hi, Jeff.
Yeah. BS. He doesn't hear us, or if he hears us, he blocks it out and doesn't actually listen.
Which is very sad. We're just trying to help.
That's right. That's right.
We love the show.
Yes, and we just don't want it to be filled with too many twists, which the last 3 episodes haven't been.
Right.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, it's been nice. It's been, I don't know, it feels like Survivor again.
I know.
Crazy.
Weird.
It's crazy.
All right. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we get to the rules?
No, I think you did a fine job hitting on all of the things that needed to be discussed and then adding some additional components there that
What
we can
kind
move
of
on from.
components would those
Stop
be?
it. Just
Oh.
stop.
We've been doing this long enough she can see it in my eyes.
I can. I know exactly that look where I'm like, here he goes again. He's going to start doing some shit. Anyway.
Not me.
Can you see my left hand yet?
No, I couldn't. Uh-oh. Well, before we see how Franny did, we need to mention that the rules that we're about to discuss come in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster form. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster, click it, buy it, hang it.
Love it.
Remember, of course, that Carolyn revealed that she already has a poster and she lives by it. So
yes,
you could be like Carol. Well, again, nobody can be like.
So that's it. So it's click it, buy it, love it, live it.
Live it.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah. See.
And then also you could keep scrolling down and you can get the poster on a T-shirt. Keep scrolling down and you can get the checklist version, which I'm wearing today.
I was actually really excited. I should just want to add that the amount of color choices for the T-shirts is really amazing.
Good.
Yeah. I was kind of scrolling. The green looks really nice. I was like, I should get the green one.
There you go. And so should everyone else. Be like Jessica.
Yes. Be like me, except in the sand.
Oh, should I show them how not to be?
No. They've already been scarred enough. We don't need to keep scarring people who are actually watching us. I'm so sorry.
So again, go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed and you can find it all there.
Beautiful.
So was there anything else that we need to cover, or are we good? I think we're
good. Let's talk about Franny.
Well, this episode had a lot of people running around just to end up with what was seemingly the obvious outcome. But obvious doesn't always mean well explained or understood. Yes, everybody knew Franny was a threat. But why was she a threat? How did she get to that point? Did everybody think that for the same reasons? Franny said she loved tests. So we'll see how she did in this final exam for following the rules as we determine why Frannie lost. Now we begin with the first and most important rule, scheme and plot. And to reiterate, sorry, Jamie, the era of alliances is not over.
I know. It's still a thing.
Yes. Franny certainly knew this and was acting accordingly. Early on, she had alliances with Matt, of course, and Claire, and tried working with Heidi as well. Indeed, while Danny was pushing the challenge strength aspect in the first Soka vote, Franny was pushing the trustworthy aspect and the importance of alliance strength. Then once she got to what was supposed to be the merge, she spoke in interviews about how Soka had a plan to appear divided but secretly work together until Matt was voted out and that kind of fell apart. So she went looking elsewhere. She was reaching out, trying to make connections, but other factors that we will discuss along the way intervened.
Yeah, I really was impressed with that whole concept of she with the other three kind of creating this group that people didn't really know existed, where there was 2 and 2 and then kind of formulating their own connections and then coming back together. I thought that was really quite ingenious, but unfortunately it didn't last long because we lost Matt so quickly. But this brings me to another interesting point then. If that really was the plan, and I know that maybe I'm jumping ahead, but her not throwing that challenge to keep Matt around, I'm then questioning that strategy component, right? Because if that had been the plan, if the 4 of them were going to create this thing,
she had answers to that. We'll
and she did.
So,
but I'm curious because it sounded like such a great strategy. And so I think what you're doing in that moment is you're not just negatively affecting your own game. It's the other 3 people that you've created this plan with that
Who cares
now,
about the other 3 people? Only care about yourself.
Well, I'm not. Listen, I just thought it was interesting.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I mean, she had reason. We'll get to that in the third rule,
Yes.
actually. But in this episode, Franny was working hard on her strategy. She noted in interviews that, while her picks to take on the reward were partially emotional and certainly defensible in terms of taking the moms for letters from home, there was more to it than that. She wanted to form a better relationship with Carolyn. She wanted to get Lauren alone and away from Jamie, Jam, and Carson. And she was trying to maintain a working relationship with Heidi. Now, after the discussions at the sanctuary, a lot went on back at camp before tribal council, and there was that apparent confusion in the air, though, as we noted earlier, much of it wasn't real. Franny said in her interviews that she didn't understand why people couldn't just vote Danny. So they switched it to Heidi as a last-minute plan. Now, interestingly, when I rewatched this, I noticed that Lauren appeared to be the one who suggested this. So I wonder if she wasn't like just trying to deflect Franny's attention when Franny started getting suspicious. Then we saw Carolyn tell Carson, and he talked about not liking last minute plans, but we didn't realize just how last minute it was because Franny said it was about 10 minutes before leaving for tribal council.
Right.
Now, we've seen before that sometimes the last plan is the successful plan, and Carolyn did tell Carson sometimes the last minute stuff is the best. But again, as we discussed earlier, others had too much invested in the anti-Franny plan, and Carson and Jam had probably been lying to Carolyn all day, so they weren't going to change it on this whim.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well, that it really, the Lauren component, I think, is very fascinating because I hadn't really noticed that. And then I was listening to Rob discuss that particular point as well. And I think that that's essentially what happened. It was we need to make Franny feel as good as possible right now, and she's questioning too much. And I think they all realize that Franny is a strategist and Franny is pretty smart and aware of what's happening. And the fact that she's questioning, why is this even a problem? Why can't we just do this? To then give her an option. Well, Heidi's the one that's creating all of this drama and this disarray and these issues. Let's just vote her out. It kind of rejuvenated Franny, right? Where we're like, oh, great. We all agree. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. We're good. Yeah. And it was so quick. And it was so like, it's amazing that she was able to pull it off, that Lauren was able to flip it so quickly and so unsuspiciously, because normally when you drop someone's name, there's a whole lot of like, I don't know. But for whatever reason, she just hit it on the nose immediately and everyone felt better. At least everyone, Franny and Carolyn, felt better. And that was all they needed to do. It's like, we just got to get a tribal council. We need to calm her down and not have her overthink anything. And now she thinks that there's a plan in place and we're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so she it was an uphill battle. Speaking, of uphill battles, we talked about earlier.
Oh, funny.
But hers was more metaphorical. She had the battle of trying to make a plan with people who were already planning completely against her. So you at least made it to the end of your uphill battle. She
eventually
did not. Yes. With the other people yelling in the background, you can do it. So
it was so terrible. Sorry, Adam. I lost that one for us. Damn it.
Now,
but actually, no, we all did because we didn't finish that puzzle either. So it was all of us.
Yeah, sure. Now, one other thing that deserves to mention is
you're so mean. You're just so mean.
I just agreed with you.
I will never live this down. Like, he can't even talk anymore.
It deserves mention, but I can't say it. Although it didn't end up working out for her. Franny was, of course, the only one who we've seen who has identified Tika playing the middle.
Yes.
But she said in interviews that when people wouldn't listen to her, well, if you can't beat them, join them. So she told them that she wanted to work with him. And that didn't go so well.
Well, and I have to applaud her because I really do feel like this whole idea that alliances aren't a thing. And she's like, hi, you see those 3 people over there? That's called an alliance. And if we
Yes.
don't do something about it, we're all going to be in trouble. And they were like, no. So
Yeah.
she was like, fine, I'll go hang out with them then because they actually want to have an alliance. And what they're doing is working. It's so frustrating that that was shot down so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and that actually takes us to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. And I think one reason Franny's attempt to work with the Tika 3 didn't work was that Carson and Jam Jam saw the downside of her getting too close to Franny. So that was a bit too much for them. It made sense for Franny to try, but I think it became too obvious how close they were.
I think this is such an incredible component of the game thus far that Carson and Jam Jam have such a control over the game because they are understanding the responses that Carolyn is going to have to certain things, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's so
And not
fascinating.
not just Carolyn. I mean, I think they understood, like, Danny. They knew Danny wanted Franny out.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's support him, you know.
Right. And I'm
they,
not
you know,
discounting that either.
right,
I'm just
right,
talking about in this particular moment when
right.
you have someone who is part of your core 3 and you want to try to manage your alliance if you can. And you're also very aware of we don't want to upset her. Now, I mean, she is going to be upset, but I think they're going to be planning for that too. So it's a very fascinating thing to watch that they are so mindful of her and how are we going to deal with this when we get back
Mhm.
and what are we going to do? It's very long-term thinking, which I can appreciate very much.
Yeah, yeah. Now, they were mindful about it, but they still did it.
Oh,
So
but
we'll have to
but
see how that
I
works
have
out.
I have a theory about all of that. I
Me
have a
too.
theory, which we'll get to
Yeah.
because we don't want to jump ahead or anything.
That's right. That's right. If you jump ahead, I'll hit play on the video. Um,
So mean.
Now, this was, of course, not the first time that Franny had an obvious alliance with her. There was some guy named Matt. And, you know, we discussed at the time how one reason Matt was targeted was related to being in a duo with her. Then she tried working with Kane, but I think she was a bit too obvious there as well, because that's why everyone left her out of last week's vote. They thought that she was too close to him. So whatever it is, she keeps trying to make these plans, but people always seem to know what's going on with her.
Yeah, and I really think that part of her problem is even though she's trying to develop these relationships and form these bonds with people, I think part of Franny's just existence is she's very exuberant. I mean, you watch
Yes.
her in her interviews and
Mhm.
she seems just to be enjoying life and she just loved Survivor. And so I think for her, it probably was a little more difficult to manage that component of her, like reacting to people. She talked about it in her interviews, how if you
Mhm.
just look at her eyes when she's talking to Matt, how different it is than when she's talking to other people because she couldn't hide it. And so I
Right.
think that that's just part of who Franny is. And so it maybe was a little more obvious when all of a sudden people would notice, oh, Franny is now doing this and Franny
Mhm.
is developing that. And we have to be mindful of where Franny is. So she wasn't under the radar at all. I think she was very kind of a focal point of a lot of things.
Yes. Yes. Now, one more thing before we leave this rule, I wasn't initially thinking of, but Rob mentioned it on Know It Alls. It was the idea of a women's alliance might have worried Danny, encouraging
Interesting.
him even more to target Franny. And I saw some social media comments to that effect, especially related to her bringing only women on the reward. Now, I could see that as a possibility, but we really have nothing to tell us either way. And so, without any specific information, either from the show or anything Franny said in interviews or anything anybody else said, I'm going to say there were enough other reasons for Danny and other people to target her, some of which are still to come here. So, I'm not saying it's impossible. I just don't think it's likely.
Right. No, that's fair.
So we can move to the third rule, which tells players to be flexible. And this is where we hit a bit of an issue, and it relates to some things you were just discussing earlier. Franny told Mike Bloom in her preseason interview that she would not shrink her game or make herself smaller in any way. She wanted to be the biggest, fullest version of herself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the time, she didn't expect to become the challenge beast that she was, but that was part of where the problem began. Everyone, including us, have covered whether Franny should have thrown the challenge that got Matt voted out after she had individual immunity for herself. Now, Franny discussed in her interviews that she did, of course, consider it, but decided against it for multiple reasons. And this comes back to what you had brought up earlier. First, she thought that Matt was doing well socially and could withstand the vote, especially since it seemed to her that Jam Jam was more in trouble. Now, we discussed in Why Matt Lost how those things were not quite the case in the way that Franny thought. So we don't need to rehash that here. But I think those things made sense to her at the time from where she was sitting. Second, she said she worried that she would have been too obvious if she'd thrown it, and people would be accusing her of doing exactly what she would have done, throwing it for Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I feel like that challenge would have been easy enough that she could have thrown it, but she knows herself. She was the one doing the challenge. So, it's hard to second guess her on that aspect of things.
Sure. And I do think that this brings up an interesting component of Survivor is that it's hard to lose that competitive nature. If the people who are put on the show are competitive people, right? You have individuals
yes.
who, I mean, they want to play, they want to be involved. Full tilt boogie, yeah. And she is a Survivor super fan, loves the game. All of a sudden she's involved in these challenges and she's doing awesome in the challenges, which can be a shock to anyone's system where all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm really killing this right now. I can't believe I'm doing this. And even though you might be having a conversation in your own brain, and I know because I was there at our, merge challenge where it was down to Will and I, and it was, I mean, we were going on 2 hours almost. And you are having that conversation with yourself. Like, if I win, then I'm going to be in trouble. But if I don't win, I'm going to be in trouble, So it's like, you definitely weigh all of your options. Now, I think for her, she was probably in a much different situation where the options, I think, would have been almost to her benefit to throw that challenge, just knowing the ripple effects it could have had, because now Matt is still there and now there's this potential foursome that you have created that still exists. And I do think it's a challenge where nobody would have thought twice about her. I mean, because I think people were surprised she was even still standing up there. So the fact that she made it that long,
And that's what I was thinking about. It's a ball hanging on the edge, but she said she was so solid, it would have looked, but you can fake it. But she also described herself as awkward. So, she was probably worried in her own head that she'd make it look like she threw it. I mean, that was just the first challenge that she won. So she certainly wasn't thinking of herself as a challenge beast at that point. That was more directed at keeping Matt around. But from there, things snowballed, which brings us back to what she told Mike, and then forward to what she told Dalton this week. Now, this is a bit of a long quote, so bear with me, because she acknowledged that sometimes women win like the first individual immunity, and then suddenly they have this huge target on their backs. They can't get it off. I told myself, don't win the first immunity. And then I did that. And then I also told myself, it's a bad position to be in if you win the family reward challenge. It's so much better to be taken. And I love my family. It was so meaningful to get my letters, but I knew everyone was fine at home, right? I didn't feel like I needed that as much as other people did. So I would have been fine to get picked or not get picked. But in those challenges, something turned on in me where I just loved it. I just loved competing. I could not help myself. Especially that challenge was so much fun. I was cackling the entire time. Maybe if I had a little more rice in my belly, I would have been able to think it through. That wasn't a good one to win, but I was just so excited, I couldn't help it. Yeah. So this goes back to what you were saying. And by the way, I rewatched parts of that challenge, and yes, she is just laughing as she runs through it,
Yeah.
And, but she knew she shouldn't win them, but she did it anyway.
Yeah.
And, with immunity challenges, kind of like what you were talking about, it's more understandable because, it's immunity. You never know. But for a reward challenge, she needed to listen to that inner voice.
Yeah. And again, it's a very hard thing when you are out there to shut that down, because if you are competitive and you're like, God, I want to win. And then afterwards you're like, why did I do that to myself? Because this is the situation she put herself in. And so
Right.
it is always interesting, because we talk about this a lot. People go out and they have all of these plans when they're going to play Survivor. And then you actually get out there and realize all of these plans I made are falling by the wayside for various reasons. It could be other people. It could be just because you're like, holy shit, I'm playing Survivor and I'm going to do everything. I'm going to go full tilt boogie, and you don't realize it's a bad thing to do. And so there's so many things kind of working against you because you're in an environment you've never been in before. And how many times do you get to compete in a challenge like that and try to beat other people, and the whole world gets to watch you? It's not very often you get to do that. So yeah, I can understand entirely how it's a hard thing to not do.
Yeah, I had one player tell me recently, and I won't, call them out. They can admit it if they want to or not. They said, they wrote their own rules, based somewhat on mine and somewhat on other things. They wrote out their own rules and they memorized these rules. And then they got out there and whoop, just right out of their head, because of everything that was happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's, it's just something you have to try your best to do in terms of, that. And this was the third rule we were talking about, being flexible. You got to see when it's right to win and when it's not.
Right. Absolutely.
So we can move to the fourth rule, which tells players not to let their emotions control them. Now, Franny was in a complicated situation. So how do you think she did here?
Well, I think this is interesting because the fact that she didn't throw the challenge for Matt is huge, right? Because then she wasn't letting her emotions control her. So here we are telling her she should have done it, but for strategic reasons, not because of an emotional component. So she clearly kept that in check. And she was trying really hard to not like Matt, but she couldn't help but like Matt. And so I think she just found herself in a really difficult spot. And it's unfortunate because you go out to Survivor and you tell yourself there will be no showmances and I will not meet anyone. And then she meets someone and can't stop liking him and he likes her, and this nerd connection they made. So I think it just put her in a really, really tough spot. But she tried really hard to not let it affect her game. And it still affected her game, even though she didn't want it to.
Yeah, she told Rob in her interview that being with Matt was great for her real life, but not so much for her game because the relationship growing took her out of that game mindset. It's hard to quantify just how much that impacted her game.
Right.
She made it longer than Matt and seemed to be, doing okay. I don't feel like pre-merge there would have been like a different strategic relationship with, say, Danny if Matt hadn't been there, just because of their very different ways of thinking. Maybe with Heidi, but that's hard to say. But then when Matt left, Franny described herself as destabilized and, kind of without someone else to work with. And in a normal circumstance, even losing your closest ally wouldn't do that to a person because you hopefully have other allies, other friends. But of course, Matt wasn't just her closest ally, and she needed additional time to recover, time that she did not have in the new era's fast-moving game.
Right. And one of the things that she mentioned that I thought was interesting was how, like, she was crying and then surrounded by other people. I won't mention who they are, but they were yelling at her because of Matt's idol. And that was making her even more emotional because she was already upset that he was gone. And then, so she's like, now I'm having to do damage control for something that I didn't even have any control over because it was Matt. So there's this component to the game that regardless of what involvement she might have had in different parts of Matt, it then became associated to her as well because Matt was a second to her. And so I think that was another thing that she had to deal with is it's not just, I've just lost Matt. now I have to try to fix what Matt did because he said a bunch of shit he probably shouldn't have said. I've said that too many times on this this podcast. I apologize. But now she has to she has to fix that too. And so I just feel like she was then in an even worse situation just because she's dealing with all of those emotions and I have to do damage control. And it was a lot for her to have to deal with.
Yeah. We could go to the fifth rule, which reminds players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. And I think it's pretty obvious that Franny did well here, but there are a few things that I do want to cover. Among them is something related to the game overall and is based on what Franny told Dalton Ross about the topic we were just covering, how devastated she was after Matt was voted off.
Mm-hmm.
She noted that the next day they had a challenge and voted out the next person right away, no break to recover. And she added, I think in a longer game, I would have had more time to build relationships back. Now, we've talked before about how the social aspect of the game takes such a hit in this shorter version. I think Franny is a prime example. She herself took the hit of losing a person who was closest to her, and then she didn't have time to really recover. Now, Jeff Probst would probably say that's great because it kept her off balance. But no, it removes a big part of the social component of the game.
Yes, I completely agree with that wholeheartedly. Those down days are not down days. Those are the days that you are able to reflect on what's happened up to this point. What do I need to do moving forward? You can kind of spin the numbers and look at the names and the people that are still in the game and where are they at and who are they with? And if I do this or I do that, it's a relief, really. And it's necessary because then you have a day to maybe formulate that plan and maybe try to make things happen. And when things are moving so quickly, then I think that it certainly damages that component. And we saw that directly with Franny for sure.
Yeah. I mean, for her, the boom, boom, boom nature of the game forced her to be more aggressive in her game, including in social relationships. So, while normally someone might ease into a friendship and it might be less noticeable as it was happening, she kind of had to go all in on getting closer to Carolyn.
She had to go full tilt boogie.
Yes. She told Mike Bloom they'd been slowly building a relationship, but then it accelerated in the last couple days.
Yeah.
To the point that she said Carolyn was talking to her more than Carson and Jam Jam that last day. And, she had to pick it up. Once she made the decision to, flip to try to work with them, she had to make that happen.
Right.
So I think in the end, with everything that was happening, Franny may have played her social game a little too well in her last couple days, which takes us to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. Now, I think most people expect us to start in a certain place in this rule, and we're not going to, because I don't think. Well, let's continue the discussion regarding her growing friendship with Carolyn. As Franny told Mike Bloom, as follow-up to what she said about talking so much to Carolyn, she said, I can see why that was a threat to this strong three that they're trying to move through the game. And indeed, we saw it on TV as Carson identified the potential problem of Carolyn straying because she was getting so close to Franny. And this is another reason to have brought this up first in this rule, because I think this aspect of things was more threatening to the other two Tika than Franny's challenge wins were.
Oh, 100%. I don't disagree. And I think that this brings us back to what I was saying before, just regarding how Jam Jam and Carson are utilizing Carolyn. She is an emotional player, and she's talked about that. And so the connections that she is making with someone are truly genuine. And I think that you can see the same thing in Franny. Even though Franny and Carolyn are both playing the game, that I think they could recognize as being a very genuine connection. And Carolyn is the type of person that when push comes to shove, if she knows that Jam Jam and Carson have kept her out of something and haven't included her and she feels slighted in some way, she will be looking elsewhere because for her, that's very meaningful. And she's playing a different type of game than they are. And so they recognize this immediately. And I do think that a threat to Carson and Jam Jam became that relationship. And we've talked about this a lot, that threats come in many different forms.
Right.
And it's not just challenges on who's going to win, because Carson, hi, puzzle god, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be a threat because we know everything ends in a puzzle. So it is a very interesting portion of this whole game to consider, is where do those threats fall and what does that threat mean to each person? And I do really think that was what it boiled down to, was her social capital and what she was building, as you said, very quickly and very fast towards, we're running out of time here with this 27-day. Is it 27?
26.
26. I
Yeah,
want it
even
to be
shorter.
longer. I'm just
I know.
adding days.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah. Now, the most obvious reason Franny was a threat was due to her challenge wins. Franny said herself after winning the reward, it's simple survivor strategy. Take out the person who could, in theory, win all the challenges. And as she said in her interview with Rob, I probably should not have won it, which, we've already echoed. But even more than that, she didn't just win that challenge. She crushed that challenge. Nobody else had even landed one ball before she got both and won.
Yeah.
And then winning it in that fashion just reminded everyone about the threat she posed in that regard, with like a big red flashing light, kind of like Hotel Boogie.
Right. And now all of a sudden you have a moment where she then doesn't win. And do you take that chance now? Do you take the shot now because you don't know when you're going to have it again? Because clearly Franny doesn't seem to be shying away from wanting to win or trying to win. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those situations where now's the time that we can do this. And if we're going to do it, we might as well not wait.
Right. And this particular challenge especially involved various different aspects. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't standing. It wasn't strength. It wasn't, whatever. Danny and Jamie laid it out in their discussion. She won 3 challenges. She had strength, balance. She knew puzzles. I understand that Franny wanted to win, and, we already discussed that, but it wasn't worth it to highlight how good she was again. Rob even discussed this this week in his deep dive question, which, as we record, this is available to patrons and will soon be to everyone else. It's usually just not worth it to win reward challenges, especially in the new era.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, some people did say that, suggested that maybe the people she brought was also a problem in this regard in terms of the threat. But we already mentioned bringing the moms was the most defensible move. I don't think it would have mattered who she brought. It was the winning of the challenge that caused the problem, not who she brought with her.
But it also is interesting to consider what the conversations would have looked like had she brought Danny with her, because then she removes Danny from the ability to necessarily converse with people without Franny being present.
Yes.
That's an overnight is a long time to have conversations with people,
especially in this game. But
yeah,
I feel like this plan was already working. Like, I think it was already in the works, and they, even if they wouldn't have had that conversation, then they would have had it when, as soon as Danny got back.
Sure. But it would have just been interesting because you can try to put a fire out at least a little bit, because that is an overnight. That's a long time. Long time.
Yeah. But of course, her idea was to get rid of Danny. So obviously you don't want him with you. Now, in Know-It-Alls, Rob came down on the side of keeping threats in the game if you're Danny. Echoing something that James said on the Purple Pants podcast a couple weeks ago, and has also, said elsewhere as well. But one major problem is, and this is something that I hope to discuss, we will discuss more fully with James between now and next season, is that all the threats have to be on the same page.
Yeah.
Because it's great to say, you as a threat should have kept this other threat. But in this case, that other threat was trying to get, like we just said, Franny was trying to get Danny out.
Right. Which is weird, because he went from, I'm going to save you with an idol, to then wanting to get her out almost immediately.
Because it was never about saving Franny. It was always about saving people around him
Right.
and making a big move.
Yeah.
It was never, he didn't care that it was Franny. He
Oh,
cared
no,
that
I
he
know.
knew who the target was.
Right. And he was like, "Oh, look, I can make this big move." And I
Right.
don't discount that, but I do think that it's interesting because I think Danny is the problem here. I think Franny would have loved to have been on the same page and been like, "Hey, let's look out for
Mhm.
each other." But instead, you've got Danny who we've seen more often than not shut down people immediately. I mean, what he said this episode was,
Right.
we don't need you. This is what we're doing, but we don't
Yeah.
even need your number."
Yeah.
Thanks, Danny. For just
Well,
immediately.
and when she suggested Tika, he was like, you're being illogical.
Right. And so, Danny seems to be very final. If he has an
Yes.
idea in his head, this is it. And you're
Yeah.
not convincing him otherwise. So I don't think for Danny that he's ever looking at any type of structure like that. He's looking at it as we have to win. Nobody needs rice. That's it. That's
Right.
all there is to it without realizing, no, that's probably not going to be the best long-term solution for someone like yourself.
Right. Right. And I mean, so, the other thing is these names keep popping up. And, while they didn't vote for Danny this time, except for Heidi, I'm sure he'd heard about it. I'm sure he knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can't just say in a vacuum, all the threats should stay together, because
Right.
it requires that all the threats trust each other. And
Well, but
everyone is always looking at each other like,
right.
okay, they're going to turn on me or I'm going to turn on them. Who's going to do it first?
Right, but it's interesting that you say that because he did actually have that conversation with Brandon, right? When they were at the lunch.
Right. Yeah,
So
we're
it's
going to
like,
stick together and all the
right,
threats. And then he voted out Brandon.
I know. So it's like that was an idea that he had considered and then was like, never mind.
And we said at the time, a couple weeks ago, that was the start of the dominoes falling right there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, Franny was another domino in the threats.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, well, we can go to the 7th rule, which covers idols, advantages, and game mechanics. And while Franny didn't have anything herself, she intersected with a couple things. First, we'd heard previously that Claire told Franny that Matt's idol was probably fake, but then it seemed like Matt thought it could be real. Franny said in at least one of her interviews that she was certain it was fake and told Matt, but he wasn't quite willing to accept that. In the end, didn't matter anyway. But although, I mean, maybe it did, maybe his belief that it was real helped spur the whole, longing for his bag, which, we talked about and why Matt lost. But,
yeah.
But one idol that was definitely real was the one you just mentioned, Danny used to save her. But, that wasn't her play. That was his play. So there's really nothing to say about her for that in context of this rule.
What I just was thinking, though, which I find rather fascinating. So the discussion about Matt's bag and how he was hoping that like Franny would bring him his bag when she came to tribal council. And this was something that was discussed. Matt might have mentioned it, but that they were not allowed to do that they were told that they could not bring anything to tribal council for him. But then his bag was gone when they came back from tribal council, which I'm like, wait a second. We still have Brandon's pants. We've, people have been talking about, I think it's Bruce's pants. So, and I know from my seasons as well, when people got voted out and left things behind, they stayed there. So I just thought it was fascinating that his bag went missing, knowing what was inside of the bag. Like,
I suspect that's, leaving clothing is different than leaving your bag with advantages in it.
And right.
Because they have to be handed off. If it's, whatever it is has to be handed off.
But it's a fake idol.
I know. But they would have been giving away that it was a fake idol if they had left it there.
Not necessarily.
Because you're not allowed to just pick up an idol. It has to be given to you, or you have to find the one that production hides.
Interesting. So did they just take the idol out of the bag or the whole bag?
Well, the whole bag, because the other thing that was in there was the shot in the dark, and you can't just take someone else's shot in the dark either.
Interesting. There's too many trinkets. Too many trinkets.
Exactly.
Throwing things off. Yeah. Anyway, this is a little side note.
Yeah. So now we can go into the appendices, beginning, of course, with Appendix A, which is about the tribe keeping their end goals in mind when voting. And we talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. We are still at the point where it's common for people to vote out the stronger threats. And we've already spent a lot of time discussing Franny in that regard. I've seen some people saying that Jam Jam and Carson should have kept Franny and gone for someone like Jamie or Heidi, who serves as less of a shield for them. So we're back to this whole threat shield thing. But there are a few reasons that I disagree with that take. First, we discussed earlier what one of the main concerns was with Carolyn, that she would, or that was that Carolyn would work with Franny.
Right.
And obviously, that's a Franny specific problem and has nothing to do with anything else. Second, Carson and Jam Jam probably heard about Franny previously wanting to target them, because after all, Kane said in interviews that he'd heard about it. So the word was out and about. And yeah, Franny came to them after it didn't work and said she wanted to work with them. But I've got to still think that was in the back of their minds. Like, wait a minute, she wanted to vote us out, and now suddenly she wants to be our friend, and she's taking our other friend.
Yes.
Third, Rob and Adam discussed on the recap show how threat shields need to be the appropriate type. So keeping a challenge beast doesn't necessarily help shield a strategic player. Now, Franny was both, but most of the other players were more worried about the challenge aspect. And that's not going to help Carson and Jam Jam,
Right. Right.
So, plus she's just not much of a shield if she was pointing at them sometimes and potentially prying one of them away. And then finally, beyond all that, Franny would have had a much better chance to beat them at the end compared to Jamie or Lauren, at least from what we've seen.
Yes. And I do think it's interesting to consider how, like, let's say they get down to the final 5, final 4, and it's Franny, Carson, Carolyn, and Jam Jam. And if there is any concern about who's developed a better relationship, that's when things can become pretty sticky, right? Because now you've got people that have to make a decision, and knowing how Carolyn is in more of the emotional component. So they are definitely thinking long term, and they are definitely thinking what's going to be best for their game. As far as challenges, I mean, yes, I think Carson is excited. He's won one, but no one's looking at Jam Jam thinking that that's going to be an issue. And Carson has even been able to hide himself relatively well, even though he's still won. We know that he 3D prints every puzzle, but nobody else knows that because he's hidden that as well. So it is interesting to see how the choices are kind of coming together, but that the two of them are really kind of leading what the focal point is, but the narrative that is being developed from it is not about them. They're attaching themselves to the narrative that is being created by everyone around them, which has allowed them to hide very, very well. So it's an incredible thing to watch because it seems like, oh, she's the challenge beast, and Danny, she's a challenge beast. She's got to go home. Okay, Danny, that sounds great. Because they know that it's going to benefit them, but for different reasons.
Right. Now, speaking of Danny, first of all, I want to note, he kept talking about how you should go all out and be great in challenges. And then he targeted Franny for doing exactly that. So that's both
note to self, Danny.
Yeah, both hypocritical and prove the point that we already discussed, that he and Jeff were wrong. Now, as far as Lauren and Jamie, they were probably happy to go along with whatever plan looked like it was most likely to work rather than continuing to go down with the sinking Ratu ship. I think it's also important, and we've done this already, but kind of, I think, to wrap it up a little bit here, take a step back from the specifics of this vote in this appendix and look at the big picture. Franny was tagged as a big threat for her challenge wins, like you said. People thought Jamie was a big threat because she might have an idol. But the actual big threat, and we could go down and name several others, but the actual big threats are the ones Franny identified last week, the Tika 3. And as they're keeping people busy aiming at each other, they are just continuing to sneak by.
It's amazing. But alliances are not a thing.
No.
Come on, David.
This is a low.
Jeez.
Yes. All right, we can move into Appendix B, which deals with the jury phase of the game. Now, I think this impacted Franny in two ways. First, we already discussed how people talked about not wanting to face her in front of the jury because she was seen as such a threat. Okay, that's fairly obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Second, though, we have to remember she had one absolutely 100% guaranteed vote already sitting in the jury.
Yes, and also someone who could be advocating on her behalf very
Yes.
heavily at Ponderosa.
Because
Mhm.
he was the mayor.
Yes.
He was the mayor of Ponderosa. He set the tone. He got to
Mhm.
talk to every single juror.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's a hard thing to get away from.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that most of the votes we've been seeing have been like 7-1, but you never know when one vote could make all the difference, especially if that one vote can help tilt things.
Mhm.
You know?
Sure. Yep.
So, all right. It is about time to wrap things up. So, what are your final thoughts?
I am so pleasantly surprised by Franny. I know that going into this season, I was excited about her and I wasn't sure how she was going to necessarily fit amongst everyone that was in her tribe. But rewatching her in all of her exit interviews just made me realize again why we all fell in love with Franny and why we were excited to watch Franny. She is just so exuberant, as I already expressed. Just her ability to be so excited and just love every moment of what she's involved in, I think is really what she carried into Survivor. And that's how she played the game. She indicated she was not going to shrink herself, and she stuck to her plan. We've talked about how most times people go into Survivor with their plans and it doesn't work out. Hers did. She did go in full tilt boogie and just took it head on and was like, I'm just going to do everything. I'm going to make the best friends with people. I'm going to find someone that I end up falling in love with, even though I didn't mean to. I'm going to kill it in these challenges, even though I never intended to actually be able to do that. She lived her best Survivor life. And for her, that's incredible, but unfortunately, it didn't help her win the game. So it's a balancing act, right? Playing Survivor is balancing who you are as a person and also realizing this is a game for $1 million. And I feel like Franny was unable to take that self that she wanted to put on full display and realize maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe shrinking myself a little bit would have been a good idea. Maybe keeping myself in a box a little bit would have been a good idea. But unfortunately, Franny let everybody see every component of her. She was a strategist. She was able to form relationships with people. So socially, she was fantastic. And then she's killing it in the challenges. So everything that we talk about as a triple threat, Franny was. And so I just think that for Franny, unfortunately, she couldn't minimize herself. She really did put herself on full display. And unfortunately, I think that's really why she ended up not winning.
Yeah. Franny was seen as a threat even before this episode. After all, RHAP targeted her 2 votes earlier, and Brandon told Rob in his interview that they did so because she was killing challenges and well liked by everyone. Sometimes threats ebb and flow, but Franny's star, apparently I have the hiccups. Franny's star just kept rising, including at times when she now acknowledges it shouldn't have. But as we discussed, those were the obvious things that made Franny look like a threat. I think most of those who voted her out were doing it for those reasons. But Carson and Jam Jam had another reason that was even more important: the possibility that her being there could interfere with their overall game plan to get to the end and proceed with Carolyn. Don't get me wrong, Franny was indeed a big threat anyway, because she was playing well on multiple levels. But she wasn't the only one. Carson was known to crush puzzles. We discussed that. Danny did very well in physical challenges, even though he's been mostly coming in second. Jamie, we discussed, was thought to have an idol. Heidi was thought to be transparent and playing well, and so on. But Franny posed the biggest threat to the Tika alliance. And they have been instrumental in guiding so many of the votes. Jeff said everyone should play Full Tilt Boogie to win. Franny played Full Tilt Boogie in multiple ways, from the challenges to the social game, maybe more so than anyone else this season. And she was sent home. This is why players should ignore what Jeff says when it comes to strategy. And it is also why Franny lost.
Do you know what's happening there
Full Tilt Boogie.
to you? Oh no, what's you having the hiccups when you're trying to do your final conclusion?
Yes.
It's called karma.
It's called karma?
Yes, because you were like, oh, everyone should see this video of Jessica dying in the sand.
I do want everyone to know I didn't tell you specifically what I was
doing.
You
did not tell me specifically that
I asked permission to discuss the topic.
Yeah, discuss and video are two very different
I said
things.
when you agreed, I said you don't know what you just agreed to, and you said that.
Well,
was okay.
because you said discuss. If you had said video, listen, you're talking to a lawyer right now, okay? So just I want you to know, words matter. Words matter.
And an oral agreement is worth the paper it's written on.
To discuss. Discuss.
I don't remember if I said specifically, only discuss, or there was no exclusion. There was no exclusionary clause. So
yeah, you keep saying that. And You just can't see my left hand.
Oh, I can see your left hand. All right.
Oh my goodness. Okay, what's next?
Before we get to predictions, and the video again. Let me remind everyone.
Those hiccups are going to come back.
The rules we just discussed are available in poster form and in t-shirt form, and of course in checklist t-shirt form, which you can barely see that I'm wearing. Just go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
Perfect.
And for anyone who would like to get in touch with us to request copies of this video, how would they do that?
Don't contact me if you want a copy of that video. You can probably order the season if you want on Amazon, but you could certainly follow up with me on Twitter. I'm at Jessica Lewis 89. I will not be providing copies of that video. However, the guy next to me might be willing to do so because he seems to be enjoying this very much. And he has a link tree because there's so many ways that you can find and follow David Bloomberg. And he's actually put his link tree information underneath himself there in his little box. So this has all of the ways: Instagram, TikTok, you name it, Twitter, everything under the sun regarding David Bloomberg you can find on his link tree there that he has displayed for everyone.
Yes, and as it is under my name now, it's linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE. Go there and you can find links to everything else that I have, including all my 3 video locations where I am conveniently David Bloomberg TV for all of those.
It's very good.
Certainly more conveniently than last season when I was 3 different account names.
Right. See, you've minimized but maximized at the same time.
That's right. That's right. All right. It's time for predictions. And
I have a good one.
I have to admit that coming up with a prediction this week is more difficult than most weeks. I mean, I've been wrong most weeks, but at least it's been easier for me, despite, the outcome. So maybe not being certain will lead to a correct prediction. To start with, the preview showed Jamie saying she and Lauren have all the power. Considering everything we've seen Jamie say over the course of the season, it is safe to say they absolutely do not have any of the power. I suspect they may come to believe that because Carolyn will obviously be mad at Carson and Jam Jam. And when Carolyn is mad, everybody knows it. So Carson and Jam Jam will obviously want to reel her back in. Since we just discussed how that was a big reason for wanting to vote out Franny after all.
Yep.
I think they'll be successful. Carolyn won't be happy. She may remember it, but she will eventually move past it when it comes time for strategy. Of course, one great way to get back on her good side would be to do what she's been wanting to do for a while now, which is vote out Danny. Honestly, when I started going through this path in my mind, I didn't expect to arrive at this point again because I keep predicting Danny and it doesn't happen. But I find that's where the logic brings me. Not just because Carolyn wants it, but because, as we discussed earlier, he lost a challenge shield in voting out Franny, and he's next in the row of dominoes that started with Brandon. Now, the only thing that gives me pause is that after I thought this through and put together my notes, I saw the preview information that they're doing the challenge in the water under the grate. Danny teaches breathing techniques. You would think this would be something he could do pretty well. But I can't think of who else it might be, so I'm still going to predict Danny again.
All right. I'm not. But here's my thought process. I do think that the reason why Danny won't be targeted is because he is going to win immunity. And it's just going to be one of those situations where it's like, oh, we can just do that next time. And then, oh, we can't do that next time. But there is this whole issue that we've discussed with Carson and Jam and Carolyn and needing to get her back on their good side. So what I think will happen is there will be a conversation had between the three of them where they will realize how all of this came to be. How did she get bamboozled into thinking that it was going to be Heidi? Like, how did that end up occurring? And that comes from Lauren, right? If they get her to realize, well, Lauren is the one that actually told you that it was going to be Heidi. We didn't do that. Like we were listening to Danny and company over here, and they were telling us that Franny was the target. We weren't involved in that conversation, but Lauren was the one that was running around saying these things. And then she's going to be upset with Lauren because she's going to feel like Lauren is the one that went against her and Franny because they had come up with this plan together, and Jam and Carson were not part of that plan. So if they want to make her feel better, well, let's get back at Lauren then, because Lauren is the one that lied to you and created this plan that wasn't a thing because she was protecting Danny. And now Danny has immunity, so we can't target him. So let's target Lauren. So that's where I think it's going to be Lauren.
I considered Lauren. I considered almost everybody, but yeah, I could see it. I could see it being Lauren also.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Okay.
But I'm really bad at this. So other things.
I'll just keep predicting Danny apparently until
eventually you will be right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. We discussed last week how Lindsay was a patron, and last season Owen and Cassidy and James, and so yeah, patrons are everywhere on Survivor. So become a patron, get on Survivor. That's obviously automatically the way it works. Insert disclaimer here that that's not actually the way it works. But it's still a great group of people, and it can't hurt. So go to robhasawebsite.com/patron or click on the link at our robhasawebsite.com/YXLost feed page. Also, make sure you're subscribed to all of the reality TV RHAP podcasts by going to robhasawebsite.com/RHAP feed. Select your podcast service of choice, and boom, there it is. You'll not only find all the great Survivor content across the network, but also podcasts on a number of other shows covering just this huge gamut of things. So definitely, again, go to robhasawebsite.com/RHAP feed.
Excellent. Can we thank people now?
Always.
Excellent. So good. So we would like to thank Scott, Jill, and Derek for all of the editing that they do here, not only for the Why Blank Lost podcast, but all of the content that you see on the RHAP page. Thank you for all of the incredible work that you do. There is so much content there, and it really does take an incredible group of people to put that forth to the universe. So thank you for the work on that. Thank you to Chelsea for all the posts that you create regarding all of the RHAP content. And also thank you to Tricky for the artwork that you see displayed here. It's quite beautiful. Thank you to Will from America for the theme song that you created for the Why Blank Lost podcast. And you're over there having a party again with your full tilt boogie, bringing us home, right? We're closing it in. We're shutting things down, but you're still over there partying. So
gotta go back into boogie mode.
So thank you, David, for another opportunity to sit down and chat with you regarding this week's episode and for changing your schedule a little bit for me. So I appreciate that too. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for another great week. And, we will see everyone right back here next week, probably with less boogieing. We'll see you then. Bye.